There was nothing impressive about it. No audience, no recognition, no affirmation. Her obedience did not attract attention. It did not produce immediate results. It did not make her visible. And yet, it mattered. She had learned how easy it is to be faithful when someone is watching, when effort is noticed, when obedience is rewarded with affirmation. But this season was different. This was obedience without witnesses, faithfulness without feedback, consistency without applause. She prayed when no one knew. She chose integrity when it cost her quietly. She remained faithful in places that felt small, overlooked, and spiritually unremarkable. And sometimes, that felt harder than public obedience ever had. Because hidden faith tests motives. It strips away the question, will this be seen? And replaces it with, will this still matter if no one notices? She wrestled with that. There were days when she wondered if her faithfulness was being wasted, if obedience without visibility had any value at all, if God noticed what no one else did. Deep inside, she sensed a truth that would not leave her alone. God does his deepest work in places that remain unseen, not because he avoids visibility, but because he cares more about formation than recognition. Staying obedient when no one noticed required a different kind of faith. Faith that did not depend on validation. Faith that did not measure worth by response. Faith that trusted that God sees what others overlook. She realized that obedience is not an audition, it is devotion. And devotion does not need witnesses. If you've ever done the right thing without being thanked, if you've stayed faithful without encouragement, if you've obeyed God, in a season that feels hidden, stay. This message is for the woman whose faithfulness feels invisible, but whose obedience is quietly shaping her life. And if these words feel close to home, consider subscribing. Not for the channel, but so your heart always has a place to return when obedience feels unseen and faith feels quiet. Now, let's walk through what it means to remain obedient when no one notices, and why God sees it all. Obedience becomes heavier when it is unseen, when no one affirms it, when no one thanks you for it, when no one acknowledges the cost it requires. She felt that weight because hidden obedience does not come with encouragement. It does not come with feedback. It does not come with reassurance that what she is doing matters. It simply asks her to continue. She noticed how easily motivation fades when faithfulness is invisible, when doing the right thing goes unnoticed, when integrity costs something and gives nothing back, when obedience feels like a private sacrifice with no visible fruit. She asked herself questions that quietly troubled the heart. Does this make a difference? Is this worth continuing? Does God really see this? Because when obedience is hidden, it confronts our deepest motives. It removes the reward of recognition and leaves only trust. Trust that God sees what others do not. Trust that obedience is not wasted, even when it is not rewarded. Trust that faithfulness has value, apart from visibility. She realized that public obedience often feeds the ego, but hidden obedience forms the soul. Public faith is celebrated. Hidden faith is refined. God was not asking her to remain unseen forever. He was shaping her heart in a place where applause could not interfere, because recognition can distort obedience. Praise can shift motives. Visibility can turn devotion into performance, but hidden obedience keeps faith pure. It asks a simple question: would you still obey if this never brought recognition? And answering that question required surrender. She learned that God often trains his daughters in quiet places, not to diminish them, but to ground them. He wanted her obedience to come from love, not validation, from devotion, not attention. Hidden obedience felt heavy because it stripped away every reason to obey, except one: God was worthy. And slowly, as she continued without applause, she began to sense something changing. Her faith became less dependent on response, less reactive to affirmation, less fragile when unseen. She was learning to obey for God alone, and that kind of obedience, though invisible to the world, was building a strength no one could take from her. At some point, she realized something quietly freeing. Her obedience was not meant to be noticed by people. It was meant to be seen by God. That truth didn't come easily, because part of her still longed to be acknowledged, to be affirmed, to know that what she was doing was not invisible. She wasn't seeking praise. She was seeking reassurance. Reassurance that her faithfulness mattered, that her sacrifices were not meaningless, that her obedience was not disappearing into silence. But God was gently shifting her focus. He was teaching her that obedience loses its power when it depends on recognition, because recognition changes the center. It moves obedience from devotion to response, from love to reward, from God to people, and God wanted her heart undivided. She began to understand that God often removes witnesses, not to isolate us, but to purify our motives. When no one is watching, obedience becomes honest. There is no audience to impress, no image to maintain, no reward to anticipate. Only God. She noticed how this kind of obedience felt different, quieter, less dramatic, more grounded. She wasn't obeying to be affirmed. She wasn't staying faithful to be validated. She was obeying because God was worthy, and that changed everything. Her faith no longer rose or fell with response. Her obedience no longer weakened when encouragement disappeared. She learned to draw strength from God's presence, not people's reaction. This did not make her cold, it made her stable. She could serve without resentment, remain faithful without bitterness, obey without constantly wondering who was watching, because she knew someone was. God saw the quiet choices, the unseen sacrifices, the integrity that cost her privately, the faithfulness that went unnoticed. And God's seeing was enough. She realized then that obedience was never meant to make her visible. It was meant to make her faithful, and faithfulness, even when hidden, is never overlooked by God. She began to notice something unexpected happening inside her. As she stayed obedient without recognition, a different kind of strength started to form. Not the strength that comes from being affirmed, not the confidence that grows from being seen, but a quieter strength, one that did not depend on response. Hidden obedience was doing a work that visibility never could. It was teaching her to stand without applause, to remain faithful without reassurance, to keep going. When nothing pushed her forward except trust in God, she realized that being unseen did not make her weaker. It made her rooted, because roots grow in darkness. No one sees them forming. No one applauds their progress, and yet they determine everything that will eventually rise. God was strengthening her character in the hidden place. He was forming patience that didn't need reward, integrity that didn't seek validation, faith that didn't depend on encouragement. She learned that hidden obedience reveals what public obedience hides, who we are when nothing feeds our ego, and God was shaping her to be steady so that if visibility ever came, it would not define her. If recognition ever arrived, it would not control her. If affirmation ever appeared, it would not become her fuel. She would already know how to obey without it. There were days when she felt tempted to stop, not out of rebellion, but out of fatigue. fatigue from doing good quietly, from choosing integrity repeatedly, from staying faithful without seeing fruit. But every time she stayed, something deepened. Her obedience became less emotional and more intentional, less reactive and more anchored. She wasn't being shaped for visibility. She was being shaped for longevity. God was building in her a faith that could last, a faith that would not collapse when applause faded or circumstances changed. And she realized something sacred. The hidden place was not where her faith was shrinking. It was where it was being strengthened. Over time, something settled quietly in her heart. She no longer needed to be seen to feel secure. She no longer needed affirmation to keep obeying. She no longer needed results to believe her faithfulness mattered. God's approval became enough. This did not happen suddenly. It was formed slowly, choice by choice, day by day, obedience by obedience. She learned to listen for God's voice instead of people's response, to measure faithfulness by alignment with Him, not by visibility. There was freedom in this, freedom from comparison, freedom from resentment, freedom from the pressure to be impressive. She could obey quietly and rest fully because she knew that God sees what others never will. He sees the small choices, the hidden sacrifices, the integrity that costs her privately, the obedience that no one applauds. And God's seeing was not passive. It was attentive, intentional, honoring. She realized that God does not overlook hidden faithfulness. He treasures it because it comes from love, not from performance. Staying obedient when no one noticed taught her to live before God alone, and that posture changed everything. Her faith became lighter. Her obedience became steadier. Her heart became less divided. She was no longer asking, "Does this matter?" She knew it did, because God was present there too. In the end, she didn't stay obedient because someone was watching. She stayed obedient because God was worthy. She learned that faithfulness is not proven by visibility, but by consistency. That obedience is not wasted because it is hidden. That integrity matters, even when it costs quietly. That God sees what the world ignores. She didn't quit when no one noticed, and staying formed something lasting within her. If you are in a season where your faith feels unseen, where your obedience feels unnoticed, where doing the right thing costs more than it gives, let this be your reminder. God sees you. He sees the quiet choices, the hidden faithfulness, the obedience no one applauds, and nothing done for Him is ever wasted. If you want a place to return when faithfulness feels lonely and obedience feels quiet, consider subscribing, not for the channel, but for your journey, because staying obedient when no one notices is never invisible to God.